A U.S. media outlet suggests a small number of North Korean troops sent to Russia is already inside Ukraine, going beyond what has so far been officially confirmed. Against this backdrop, South Korea's Defense Intelligence Agency has raised the possibility of another nuclear test and a long-range missile test by North Korea around the presidential election timing in the U.S. With the U.S. election only a few days away, we take a look at any post-election impact on South Korea, from the situation of the alliance to North Korea issues and trade policies. It's October 30th, 8 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Min. A U.S. report says a compact contingent of North Korean troops is already inside Ukrainian territory, which could further escalate tensions if confirmed. Yoon starts us off.
A CNN report published Tuesday U.S. local time cited two Western intelligence officials who claimed that a small unit of North Korean troops is already in Ukraine. The officials expect the number to increase as North Korean military forces finish training in eastern Russia and move toward the front lines of the conflict. This information goes beyond confirmation provided earlier by the U.S. government.
As we highlighted earlier this week, we believe that the DPRK has sent approximately 10,000 soldiers in total. A portion of those soldiers have already moved closer to Ukraine towards Russia's Kursk Oblast near the border with Ukraine, approximately a couple thousand, with a smaller number already present in the Kursk region.
While the U.S. government said it does not have information to address reports of North Korean forces in Ukraine, it expressed concerns about potential developments and noted that it is closely monitoring the situation.
We are concerned that they do intend to employ these forces in combat against the Ukrainians, or at least support combat operations against the Ukrainians in the Kursk region.
This follows an earlier claim by the Lithuanian NGO Blue Yellow, which has been assisting Ukraine's military, that the first encounter between Ukrainian troops and North Korean military forces occurred on October 25th in Russia's Kursk region, leading to the death of all but one North Korean. U.S. President Joe Biden on Tuesday also expressed concerns about the presence of North Korean troops in Russia, stating that if they cross into Ukraine, Ukraine should respond with force. On the same day, State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller criticized Russia and North Korea, stating that the deployment of North Korean troops marks a significant escalation in the DPRK's ongoing involvement in Russia's illegal actions and another breach of UN Security Council resolutions. Yoon, Arirang News.
South Korea's support for Ukraine will remain unaffected by the result of the U.S. presidential race. Remarks to this end were shared by the top office on this Wednesday in response to questions by the press poll here about the possibility of a shift in stance by Seoul in the event of former President Donald Trump returning to the White House. The Yongsan presidential office has vowed unwavering support for Kyiv, as the stance is in line with Seoul's own interests. Separately, a special Ukrainian envoy to South Korea is expected to arrive soon, assigned with the task of strategic bilateral partnership in light of North Korea's troop presence in Russia's war against Ukraine. Meanwhile, North Korea may conduct its 7th nuclear tests and launch a long-range missile around the upcoming U.S. presidential election. Kim Bo-kyung shares the details.
South Korea's Defense Intelligence Agency warns of a possible 7th nuclear test by North Korea, the first in 7 years, saying the regime has completed internal preparations at its Punggye-ri nuclear test site in Hangyeong-bukdo province. Such an assessment came during a closed-door parliamentary audit of the National Assembly Intelligence Committee that took place on Wednesday. The agency noted that the reclusive regime may stage provocations in a variety of ways around the U.S. presidential election.
North Korea is expected to try to highlight nuclear issues before the U.S. presidential election. Kim Jong-un has already inspected uranium enrichment facilities, and there is the possibility of launching missiles like SLVs, ICBMs, and ballistic missiles. A 7th nuclear test cannot be ruled out either.
The agency also raised the possibility of the North launching an ICBM-class long-range missile. Though the missile has not been mounted on a transporter erector launcher, the regime is said to have completed preparations for the mobile launcher, which has been deployed to a certain area, though a specific region cannot be named.
Since TLs have been deployed in certain areas, there could be an ICBM launch to verify the re-entry technology. It could be in November, either before or after the U.S. presidential election.
Meanwhile, regarding North Korean troops dispatched to Russia, the military intel agency reported that troop mobilization toward battlefields, including to the Kursk region, appears to be imminent, and that there is a possibility that some advanced units have been sent to the front lines. To some of the reports of North Korean casualties on the front line, the agency said there is no information to support such claims. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
And against the backdrop of heightened tensions on the war front in Ukraine, top defense officials of Seoul and Washington are scheduled to sit down at the Pentagon on Wednesday local time for their annual security talks. Defense Minister Kim Yong-hyun and his U.S. counterpart Lloyd Austin will be holding their 56th Security Consultative meeting, their first in-person exchange since Kim took office last month. Topping the agenda this year will be North Korea's troop transfer to Russia. Meanwhile, the two defense officials will then join their diplomatic counterparts on Thursday for their 2+2 meeting, the first in about 3 years. And North Korean troop presence on the front lines of Russian aggression against Ukraine has prompted Western leaders to share their concern over the future course of Moscow's military offensive. The Kremlin, in the meantime, has announced a strategic nuclear training exercise. Yoon has more.
On Tuesday, NATO's new Secretary General Mark Rutte met with EU President von der Leyen, during which they discussed the war in Ukraine and called it the biggest threat to peace and security on the continent. And for the first time, NATO confirmed the deployment of North Korean troops to Russia and their operation in the Kursk border region. Rutte said the confirmation was based on weeks of intelligence reports and a meeting with South Korean security and defense officials on Monday. He added that the recent deployment of North Korean troops to support Russia posed a serious threat, which represented a significant escalation and a dangerous expansion of Russia's war in Ukraine. And world leaders are voicing their concerns over the situation. After a meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing, Finnish President Alexander Stubb said in a press conference that North Korean activity, both in terms of arms exports and especially the sending of troops to Russia, was escalation, expansion, and provocation.
My own analysis is, this is my analysis, not the words of the president, is that for China, the Chinese-North Korea relationship is not very comfortable at the moment. Because as a matter of fact, it can lead to escalation.
On Tuesday, the Pentagon also confirmed that of some 10,000 North Korean troops sent to train in eastern Russia, a portion of them have already moved closer to the Kursk region. Spokesperson Major General Patrick Ryder said that there was still no information on how the North Korean troops will be used in operations against Ukraine or if they have crossed the border yet. Meanwhile, as Western leaders continue to express concerns over any movement threatening escalation, the Kremlin released a video on Tuesday in which Russian President Vladimir Putin announced a new strategic nuclear training exercise.
Today, we are conducting another exercise of strategic deterrence forces. We will work out the actions of officials in controlling the use of nuclear weapons with practical launches of ballistic and cruise missiles.
Putin added that Russia would stick to its principled position of using nuclear weapons as a last resort in ensuring the security of its country, and that it was not looking to be involved in a new arms race. But Putin also emphasized the importance of having modern and constantly ready-to-use strategic forces, and that it would maintain nuclear forces at the level of necessary sufficiency. Yoon, Arirang News.
In other news, a surviving Korean victim of Japan's wartime forced labor has accepted the Korean government's plan to compensate its own citizens who were forced to work in Japanese factories during World War II. Lee Chun-sik, who is now 102 years old, received on Wednesday the compensation and delayed interest payments from a public foundation that operates under the Foreign Ministry, making him the last surviving victim to do so. Lee was forced to work under harsh conditions at a Japanese steel mill in the 1940s during Japan's colonial rule of Korea, but he had to return to Korea without being paid after Japan lost the war. The so-called third-party compensation put forth by the South Korean government in March 2023 has been met with criticism by some forced labor victims and civic groups, saying it does not hold Japan accountable. Over in the U.S., a big political event is just around the corner. And our political correspondent, Lee Si-hoo, joins us in the studio to talk about the potential impact of the presidential election on South Korea. First, Si-hoo, what do predictions look like?
Yes, so it's an exceptionally close race to the White House. The latest polls show Harris and Trump neck and neck in many states, and narrow victories in just a handful of what are called battleground swing states will likely determine the winner. A recent national poll by Reuters and Ipsos shows the Democrats ahead by a single percentage point over the Republicans, 44% to 43%. Other polls also show either Harris or Trump win, but basically in a statistical tie considering the margin of error.
And how will the overall outcome of the election impact the U.S. trade policies on South Korea?
Right, so I've spoken with a number of experts on this, and they say this in comment. Under the Trump administration, many uncertainties and a continuation of Biden policies under Harris. Trump insists on the America First policy as he had during his previous term. Let's listen in to a trade expert analysis.
In the case of Trump, regardless of whether it's isolationism or nationalism, it's a form of national priority that doesn't really consider the alliance. So Trump may impose high tariffs on all cars. South Korea and the other allies cooperate in the battery supply chain, and we can sell the US, for example, our positive electoral materials we produce, but Trump may not really keep in consideration this kind of alliance.
While Trump's policy is probably applicable in all sectors, Harris and the Democrats, based on their previous stance in the Biden administration, will likely focus on a few selected areas for cooperation.
Well, Harris and the Democrats value the alliance, and we are an ally of the US. Although the US emphasizes domestic production in certain sectors for national profit, the US does cooperate in other sectors when it's needed.
Dr. Cho explains such sectors include cutting-edge semiconductor technologies and electric cars. Now, in terms of the security alliance, Trump in his campaign has repeatedly called for greater financial input from the Korean government. The Korea Institute for Industrial Economics and Trade predicts South Korea could expect not only an increase in defense costs, but also less cooperation in defense and weapons technologies.
And Si-hoo, what changes do we expect in terms of foreign and diplomatic policies on the Korean Peninsula?
So as with the trade policies, we expect to see Harris put in more effort into improving the ROK-US alliance, which is especially crucial right now when North Korea is deploying its soldiers to help Russia in its war efforts.
So I think we're going to expect to see that further continue under a Harris administration. But I think they're really going to be working towards how to optimize the ROK-US alliance to deal with this unprecedented challenge by North Korea in Russia and their collaboration.
Dr. Lee explains there may also be more multilateral partnerships with other U.S. allies, including Australia and Canada, who may come together in the absence of a UN Security Council member from Russia. But in case of a Trump win, there may be a, quote, big demand.
We will obviously expect a massive crisis in cost-sharing negotiations. President Trump has been very clear that he does not think the current arrangement is satisfactory. On the campaign trail, he's talked about $5 billion, even $10 billion in terms of special measures agreement renegotiations. So there's going to be a very big demand coming.
And Trump's North Korea policies may depend on how Kim Jong-un and the regime approach the new administration.
it really depends on whether Kim Jong-un approaches him with flattery or with, fire and fury and more nuclear, threats. So I think that will really depend, but that will shape and take place within what Russia and China are already doing. So it's not going to be happening in a vacuum, I think.
How will Seoul respond once the new administration launches?
Right, so experts suggest that the key to making this coming change an opportunity for South Korea, obviously, is to create areas where South Korea becomes irreplaceable. That may be in technologies or products that South Korea leads globally, and use the strength to make it hard for any administration to impose restrictions, but instead encourage investments in South Korea. This kind of leverage can also influence our diplomatic relations, where much of its part is intertwined with trade policies. We could also initiate preemptive talks with the U.S. government to negotiate the schedule for potential export restrictions and exemptions.
All right, thank you, Shihu. Do keep us updated.
Thank you, Jung-min.
Celebrating a milestone for one of his key policies, the return to nuclear power, President Yoon says nuclear power has been the foremost contributor supporting South Korea's economic growth and prosperity. On Wednesday, he attended the completion ceremony of Shinhanul nuclear reactor units 1 and 2, as well as the groundbreaking ceremony for units 3 and 4. He also mentioned that South Korea's consortium became the preferred bidder to build the Dukovany nuclear power plant, saying more projects will come and that a nuclear renaissance has started. He also pledged more investment for R&D in the sector, including for SMR development, and to create more jobs in the industry. South Korea's relationship with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations dates back 75 years, and in light of this occasion, our An Sung-jin takes a closer look at their ties over the years.
From recipient to donor, South Korea's relationship with the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations has changed dramatically over the past 75 years. The country is now one of the FAO's major donors, contributing to food security and sustainability for developing countries. The two have fostered a mutually beneficial partnership to achieve mutual growth and innovation for agricultural development.
FAO will continue to work closely with its members, particularly the government and the people of the Republic of Korea, for more efficient, resilient, inclusive, and sustainable agri-food system.
The FAO specializes in efforts to tackle hunger and achieve food security so people have regular access to sufficient high-quality food. South Korea has funded multiple FAO projects that work towards strengthening that capacity for developing countries. This program officer in charge of the Green Jobs for Rural Youth Employment Project, an ROK-funded FAO project which has been implemented by Zimbabwe, Sierra Leone, and Timor-Leste, says that sustainability as well as implementing partners and international cooperation play a key role in facilitating these initiatives.
In order for things to be successful, we've really had to work with local governments. It's incredibly important for them to buy in and support projects, but it's really local government in local communities and districts who are on the ground making the action work.
The FAO emphasizes policy making, capacity building, and technological development as ways to bring economic advances and agricultural progress to countries in need. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
A documentary film about RM, the leader of the K-pop boy band BTS, will be released in 90 countries worldwide, including South Korea, next month. His agency Big Hit Music announced on Wednesday that the movie titled RM Right People, Wrong Place will officially be released in theaters on December 5th. The film depicts 8 months in the life of the musician as he prepares and produces his second solo album, Right Place, Wrong Person, and explores his personal thoughts and struggles. The movie was first screened at the 29th Busan International Film Festival on October 7th. Up next, Korea boasts some of the most scenic sights of autumn hues around this time of the year. Our Park Go-nu shares with us a number of such sights.
Autumn's vibrant colors invite you to the breathtaking scenery. At this time of year, people usually visit mountains and parks to see fall foliage turning red, yellow, and more. Whereas leaves change colors and usually reach their peak from mid to late October, there's a different situation this year, and it's due to climate change.
Fall foliage color changing is at least 2 to 3 days later on average. Summer was longer than before, and the temperature rose by around 1.3 degrees Celsius compared to the average of the past decades.
The same expert also said that leaves could fall earlier than expected due to strong winds and colder weather down the road. Still, there are many options nationwide to enjoy fall foliage, as the peak season for major mountains is several days later compared to the earlier forecast by the Korea Forest Service. The organization says that only 20% of the leaves on Naejangsan Mountain, for example, in the south of the country, had changed colors by last week. Since the organization sets the peak season as when at least 50% of the foliage changes its colors, it's estimated it could be early November or even a bit later. I'm currently at Yeonsan Mountain Provincial Park located in Gapyeong-gun County in Gyeonggi-do Province northeast of Seoul, where you can enjoy an amazing view of fall foliage. This place is a very peaceful place where you can enjoy birds chirping along with the sound of the water from the valley, and there's also a fresh breeze. Many visitors also visited this area that's been chosen as one of the 5 best forest paths for leaf peeping this year by the KFS.
A few days ago, I visited a different mountain because I heard that place had reached peak season, but it hadn't. But this place was really nice with a lot of maple trees, so it made me lose track of time.
This year, the autumn leaves are late, so people said it's not that pretty. But this place is good because it's close to the city and was so beautiful from the entrance.
And as the southern part of the peninsula usually reaches its peak later than the upper areas, planning in advance is recommended to enjoy a vibrant autumn. Park Go-nu, Arirang News, Gapyeong.
With clear skies, the whole country stayed mild with temperatures above 20 degrees Celsius. However, with smoke from overseas, the concentration of ultrafine dust in the Seoul metropolitan area in Chungcheongnam-do province will rise to bad levels overnight. This dust will gradually clear up from tomorrow afternoon. Daytime temperature in Seoul will rise to 22 degrees tomorrow. As the daily temperature ranges as wide as more than 10 degrees, you should take a warm jacket with you on your way to work. Tomorrow, Chuncheon will start off at 9 degrees, Daejeon, Daegu, and Gyeongju 10 degrees. Daily highs will move up to at least 20 degrees all over the country. There's rain forecast in Jeju Island and the southern parts of the country on Friday, and in Gangwon-do province on Saturday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is Newscenter for tonight. Thanks for watching. A panel session up next.
진짜 한국에선 어떻게 먹는지 알려줄까?
K-바비큐? 신김치랑 먹어야지.
치킨? 치맥 페스티벌은 처음이지? 김치?
종류만큼 먹는 법도 가지각색.
김밥? 시장에선, 산에선, 바다에선 이렇게.
국밥? 취향 따라, 입맛 따라.
이런 한국, 와보지 않고는 모를걸? 요즘 한국에선 어떻게 노는지 알려줄까?
한국에선 아이돌이 되어볼 수도, 인생 번호를 찾을 수도 있지.
제일 핫한 포토 스팟은 여기.
한국은 분명 너에게 새로운 영감을 줄 거야.
이런 한국, 와보지 않고는 모를걸?
Future of high-tech manufacturing industry. This is GFE's Hadong District. We want to connect you to a future of possibilities with our own resources and specificity by connecting spaces to save time and cost. Connecting excellent infrastructure with technology to drive innovation. Opening possibilities by connecting technology with businesses. We will expand our horizons by connecting with the world. There is land that leads to a sustainable future. Taesong Industrial Complex, a cutting-edge material parts complex, is the best strategic industrial complex in the southern coast region of Korea. Karsaman Shipbuilding Industrial Complex, a shipbuilding and marine industrial plant cluster. It is a global logistics and industrial hub with convenient transportation and high-level accessibility, making it optimal for business investment. Starting from possibilities to becoming a global business hub, from an innovative industrial city to the center of high-tech future industries. It's the beginning for the future. Linking together, making tomorrow. GFE's Hadong District.
세종학단 재단과 함께하는 K챗이 새로운 시즌으로 돌아옵니다.
이게 제 가방이에요.
지금 뭐예요?
엽전으로 기름떡볶이를 사는 중이에요.
저는 집에서 음악을 듣고 있어요.
경복궁 구경한 후에 저녁 먹어요. 정말 커요. 제 팔만 해요.
한국을 여행하면서 사용할 수 있는 한국어 표현부터 흥미로운 한국 문화까지 더 풍성하고 재미있는 K챗 트래블링 코리아에서 만나요.
Hello and welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring today's most pressing global issues into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gyan. North Korea could hold its 7th nuclear test or test launch a missile before or after the U.S. presidential election. South Korea's Defense Intelligence Agency says North Korea has finalized internal preparations for a test at its Punggye-ri nuclear testing site, mentioning Kim Jong-un's recent visit to the uranium enrichment facility. The agency added that North Korea also appears ready to launch a long-range intercontinental ballistic missile, the timing of which could be within November. Now, concerns about the potential deployment of North Korean advanced units to the front lines of the Ukraine-Russia war have also been raised, as the agency noted that mobilization efforts of these troops, particularly towards the Kursk border region, seem to be imminent. For a deeper discussion on this, we're joined in the studio by Dr. Ko Myung-hyun, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Strategy. Welcome, Dr. Go.
My pleasure to be here.
And also joining us from New York is Mark Barry, Associate Editor Emeritus at the International Journal on World Peace. Great to have you with us, Mark.
Yes, happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, so let's start with Dr. Go. The situation in Russia. South Korea's DIA says the mobilization of North Korean troops towards the battlefields, including the Kursk border, appears to be very imminent. What kind of role do you think these North Korean soldiers would play there?
So it's also, so far it's not very clear what's the role that North Korean troops are going to have at the front lines. But what is becoming more certain is that North Koreans are going to have at least some combat roles supporting the Russian military there, because we're talking about the size of deployment from North Korea. And then we also know the unit they belong to is called the storm troops. So it's one of the best trained, well-equipped infantry units in North Korea right now. So it's obvious, I mean, it's kind of follow from there that they're going to be participating in combat against the Ukrainian forces. What's left to be seen is whether some of those units are also going to fulfill support role. At the beginning, when the rumors circulated about North Korean deployment in Ukraine, it was speculated that most North Korean soldiers wouldn't be combat troops, but rather engineers and construction units that could support Russian war effort along the front lines. So it could also be that that could be an important function for the North Korean troops going forward, which also would mean that North Korea could send more troops down the road. In addition, the 12,000 that has been estimated to be the overall scale of the North Korean deployment at the moment.
Right, so more troops could be on the way. Dr. Go, you just mentioned about the best trained soldiers. My next question is, in contrast to South Korean intelligence agencies' reports that these soldiers that have been deployed are elite, highly trained soldiers, like you've mentioned, the Wall Street Journal said these soldiers could be recently conscripted teenagers and very young soldiers with under-experience. Do we have confirmation at this point?
Well, I don't have any confirmation other than visual confirmations. So far, I mean, this also doesn't mean it's a representative proof the overall age of the North Korean soldiers who will be deployed to Ukraine in the future or present, for that matter. But then I think if you're just relying on visual clues to judge the age of the North Korean soldiers present in Ukraine in Russia right now, I think that could be potentially misleading. And the reason is because oftentimes we use the South Korean young men as a point of reference to gauge the potential age group of the North Koreans, and oftentimes we tend to underestimate their age. The reason is because obviously the nutritional situation in North Korea, which stunts the growth of young people, and also the conscription age of North Korea is below 18. So if indeed it's true that the North Korean soldiers are in their 20s, then they would have already have at least 4 to 5 years of military experience. So that's more than the military experience of a similar South Korean, similar the peer group in South Korea, which tend to have a military experience of around 2 years maximum. So that already means that North Koreans, even though they look young, it's likely that they are older than they look. So what I think the information that was coming out of actually the South Korean government, which indicated that these soldiers are probably in their early 20s. That's still young, but at the same time, given their starting conscription age of 18, it means that they already have at least 4 to 5 years of military experience. So that would qualify them as veterans. So, but at the same time, though, military experience in North Korea, which haven't seen an actual combat in the last 70 years since the end of the Korean War in 1953. So it doesn't mean that these are, well, probably well trained, but doesn't mean that they are capable enough to essentially change the situation, the combat situation on the ground in Ukraine. So that remains to be seen how effective these soldiers are going to be. But on the other hand, what we can count on, to be sure about this, the North Korean soldiers are likely to be better disciplined than the raw recruits that Russians are sending to the front lines at the moment, who tend to be middle-aged and also totally not qualified for combat roles, because oftentimes the Russian military essentially recruiting soldiers from the prison populations. So in that sense, I think the North Korean soldiers could be essentially an important contribution to Russian war efforts.
Right. Regardless of their age, and the average age could be younger with more experience. Now, President Yoon Suk-yeol also said that North Korean troops in Russia could be deployed in battlefield zones in Ukraine sooner than what was expected. What's the reason behind North Korea's hastened entry?
So there could be several factors explaining the possible early deployment, or relatively early deployment of North Korean troops. So one factor could be that the fact that the South Korean government and the Ukrainian governments are very proactive in disclosing the fact that North Korea has deployed soldiers for Russia in Ukraine. I think that probably has eliminated an element of surprise. Perhaps Kim Jong-un and Putin plan to surprise the Ukrainians and the Western powers by showcasing North Koreans overnight, essentially without really giving indications that they are already there in Ukraine. So if Putin and Kim Jong-un, they want to recoup the element of surprise, then even though it's already lost, they would even need to redeploy as many North Korean soldiers as possible and also early as possible. So that could be one factor. So, and there's also another factor independent of this issue, which is the demand for North Korean troops in Ukraine on behalf of the Russian military. It could be that the Russians are planning to essentially mount an offensive before the election in the United States. So there's a widely held expectation that if Donald Trump is elected and returns to the White House, then he could press both sides, Russia and Ukraine, for the immediate ceasefire and the end to the war. So if the Russians are planning to freeze the conflict along the battle lines right now that we observe today, it is possible that the Russians they need more troops, manpower at the moment, and that means that they will need as many soldiers from North Korea as possible and as early as possible. So that could mean that the early deployment, that could explain the early deployment of North Korean units that President Yoon has talked about.
Right. Thank you for the explanation, Dr. Go. Now, let's bring in Mr. Barry to the conversation. Kim Young-bok, a close aide to North Korea's Kim Jong-un, was also reportedly dispatched to Russia, and Foreign Minister Choi Sun-hee has also arrived in Russia. What do the visits of these top North Korean officials signal, and what is the purpose of their visit to Russia?
General Kim, according to Michael Madden, who wrote on 38 North last night, is likely supervising the Korean People's Army's Special Operation Forces transition into the Ukraine theater and consolidating command and control over all Korean People's Army assets, including munitions, technicians, etc., in the Ukraine theater. And he's also probably coordinating with Russian counterparts and creating a reporting framework between deployed personnel in Pyongyang. So that's a very close paraphrase of what he says. Foreign Minister Cho, in my view, is likely coordinating what Pyongyang will receive in return and create a detailed agreement as to how and when the DPRK will be compensated. But I doubt if she's in a position to discuss the deployment of additional troops, because that's really out of her purview. That's more for the military and the defense ministry. Nonetheless, one German institute in collaboration with, I believe, Hankook University, published a study, I think on Monday, estimating that this deal between North Korea and Russia is worth $5.5 billion.
Right. Then you mentioned receive and return, and there were figures right now. Mr. Barry, what could North Korea then get in return from Russia?
Well, I took the view in a interview I had on Busan Radio on Monday that basically because of the failure of the Hanoi summit and Kim Jong-un giving up not just on the Trump administration and the Biden administration, but on the United States as an organic entity, it now has no choice in terms of offsetting enormous pressure from China and particularly from President Xi Jinping, but to throw its lot in with Russia. So basically, I termed the relationship between North Korea and Russia as a subcontractor relationship. So basically, I don't see Kim Jong-un having a lot of wiggle room. And those who speculate that he may get important high-tech military technology, I doubt it very much. He'll have lots of old Soviet scientists who'll show him how to use a screwdriver, so to speak. They'll get a lot less than they're hoping for. What they will get is some fuel. They'll get some food stuff. They'll get some crypto cash that's been earned illegally. But I don't think they're going to get that much. But it makes for good headlines. But I think this is a raw deal for Kim Jong-un in the long run.
Right. So a mild economic assistance from Russia.
Yeah, I think that's what it really is, yeah.
Then, Dr. Go, what about military cooperation? What more cooperation can we expect between North Korea and Russia, especially after the deployment of the first batch of soldiers?
Well, it really depends on what kind of arrangements that the North Koreans and the Russian militaries are going to come up with. So there are contradicting reports in this regard. So there's some indication earlier that North Korea would only deploy their soldiers on the condition that they will be granted an independent command, independent of the Russian command. So this is oftentimes an arrangement that sovereign countries demand from a country that's essentially hosting foreign troops. And the reason is because you don't want to put your military, your soldiers under the command of another country. But it looks like that's not the case in this case. So it looks like the North Korean units will be under the command of Russian officers. And so I think this is the reason why there are reports that there's a demand for translators, interpreters, to be embedded with these North Korean units. There are reports that essentially there will be at least one interpreter for every 30 North Korean soldiers. So in that sense, I think it looks like the North Korean soldier will be serving under the Russian command. So this actually has a lot of implications. The first is that there could be it's also possible that the Ukrainians, if they capture North Korean soldiers, wouldn't get granted protection under the Geneva Convention. And the reason is because these are not regular soldiers, but essentially mercenaries working for the Russian military. So there's a room for such interpretation. It's really up to the Ukrainian authority to do so. So this makes essentially the North Korean deployment politically, in a normal country, would be politically a hot potato. But then this is North Korea, so maybe North Koreans are not demanding the Russians any compensation, despite the fact that the North Koreans have given the Russian side an important point consider this important point that they would allow their soldiers to serve under the Russians. So this is, but at the same time, the presence of General Kim Yong-bok, who's the an important military aide to Kim Jong-un, as Mr. Berry has indicated, he might be in Russia to coordinate not just the coordination between the Russian and the North Korean authorities, but also perhaps to essentially set up a command structure for the North Korean troops. So that would mean then the North Korean soldiers will be more properly acting as a soldier of a different country participating in a warfare in Ukraine. So this has all the legal implications, and perhaps the North Koreans are taking that into consideration. So we have to see how finally North Koreans will be essentially behaving or like acting on the battlegrounds of Ukraine. So it should remain to be seen.
Right, and that will decide whether more troops could be deployed.
So that's also possible, yeah.
Now, Mr. Berry, in light of North Korea's troop deployment and the tightening ties between North Korea and Russia, what kind of diplomatic strategy would you recommend for the South Korean government?
Cool heads. What North Korea wants is for South Korea to overreact. Plays right into their hands. The only condition is that I think because of the subcontractor relationship, that Putin is allowing only a certain level of mischief for North Korea. So they have to probably contain some of their mischief and reactions to the South. But as far as the South is concerned, every overreaction and anything that displays any lack of coordination with South Korea's allies will only accrue to the benefit of North Korea and Russia. So I think that this is a time for to be very, very calm and conservative, despite the situation that might cause one to act otherwise, because this is something that only can be done through the strength of allies and the coordination between allies.
Right, so we should remain cool and calm as possible. Then President Yoon Suk-yeol referred to the latest developments as a grave situation and stressed a united response with the international community. And on Thursday, foreign defense chiefs of Seoul and Washington are set to hold their sixth 2+2 talks. Mr. Berry, what can we expect from the meeting?
Well, I think this is extremely fortuitous. You have, in a matter of hours, in fact, I think the press conference will be shortly after noon today. You have the annual security consultative meeting, which alternates between the two capitals, and the South Korean defense minister and Secretary of Defense Austin will meet. And I think they'll get a lot of eye-to-eye agreement and an understanding that the United States feels it's in a position to coordinate along with its NATO allies, the assistance to Ukraine. And South Korea has to fit into that and not get ahead of its skis. And then I believe every 3 years is the 2+2 meeting that you referred to, which will include Foreign Minister Cho and Secretary Blinken that you see on the screen. And again, I think the U.S. will ask the ROK to be in lockstep with it, to act in concert, and especially because we have an election coming up in the U.S. and then a post-election period, not only in the U.S. but also in Japan, where they're trying to cobble together a government. I should also add that the elephant in the room is that we could expect that the period between November 6th and January 6th may be even more tumultuous than in 2020 and more uncertain than it was in 2000. And I think part of the reason is that absent a landslide for either candidate, one of them, a former president, will claim that he is the acting president and that he will go about that 8-week period to prove it to the American public. So you're going to have a lot of uncertainty, and so you don't want Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, et cetera, to take advantage of that uncertainty. And we don't know if American democracy will work this out well. This is a very, very dangerous period, and I can say that as a guy who lives 100 miles north of Madison Square Garden, where we saw political rally unlike we had never heard before. But there's something in the air, and it's very, very dangerous in my view. There's a lot of naivete on the part of much of the American political establishment in both sides. This is going to have huge ramifications for South Korea and Japan.
Right, so a very concerning situation indeed, and up until the U.S. presidential elections just around the corner. Now, Dr. Go, moving from this topic, South Korea's intelligence agency says North Korea has been beefing up security for its leader, Kim Jong-un, due to fears of possible assassination attempt. Can you elaborate on why and why is this leader tightening security at this time? Were there any kind of signs or signals?
Well, I think the fact that he's beefing up personal security in a one-man dictatorship that's tight control of everything is the best sign that he feels very threatened. But at the same time, whether there's an actual threat against him or his family is a different question. So there are always going to be some sort of threats against his life in a dictatorship, because clearly the entire totalitarian apparatus of the regime depends on one single person, and that happens to be Kim Jong-un himself. So yeah, threat to his life has a disproportionate impact on the overall stability of the regime compared to more stable political systems, let alone a democratic system. So, and then it's also clear that Kim Jong-un hasn't made it clear yet what kind of line of succession he's going to have in the future, even though his daughter, Kim Joo-ae, is being he appears in public more often and seems to have a high stature, but nonetheless, a lot is at stake on his life. So I think more he goes along, and the more he represses the society, he feels that the potential for threatening his life is actually going up. So it's very clear the threat perception, the perception that his life is a danger is going up. And I think it's about time, because North Korea has been subject to, the entire country has been subject to very stringent repressive measures ever since the COVID spread into the country in the 2020s. And then I think that the aftermath of it, with the very restrictive laws that controlled the information flow going after people who consume South Korean media, and also the total hermetic closing down of the border, is keeping the people inside the country and the discontent inside the society without any escape valve. So I think this is increasing the risk for attempts against life at the moment.
Now, Dr. Go, before we let you go, can we just ask one more question about our introduction? North Korea has completed preparations for a long-range missile test. What's your thoughts on this?
So I think they are ready for a test. It's a demonstrative test. They want to send a message to whoever wins the elections next week in the United States. And then also means they are essentially setting the stage for a potential dialogue with the United States. It's going to be a negotiation, not about stabilization of the peninsula, but about the one single item in the agenda, which is asking the United States to acknowledge North Korea as a nuclear state. So I think Kim Jong-un feels that he essentially has all the requisite pieces in the puzzle to be the head of a nuclear state. And finally, the final achievement for him would be for the sitting U.S. president to acknowledge North Korea as a nuclear state.
All right, so he wants to make his presence shown in this situation. I'm afraid we will have to wrap up our discussion at this point. We're running out of time. Thank you so much, Dr. Go and Mr. Berry, for your insights tonight. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for joining us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.
There is no greater blessing than to have good health as you grow old. Even though my mom is over 70, she is peppy and full of energy.